I shot my shot and I sent a Facebook message to the race team, and they came back and said, hey, we need a driver. I don't come from a family that has a racing background. I don't come from money. And to have 200 starts in NASCAR's top 3 series, I thought was pretty cool. I do think maybe there'll be a couple cup starts for me this year, probably on road courses because that's kind of my niche.
Welcome back to the Pit Crew Podcast. Today, we got a special guest. This is episode number 9. We're bringing on NASCAR driver Josh Bilicki here. In one moment, I'm going to be joined by Robert Hill for this episode. So let's get it, Robert. How you feeling about it? It's good to be back.
I am so glad to be back, Dustin. I missed you guys. Glad we had a couple weeks off there to let you guys go down and party there in Talladega. And now you're back. Now you're recovered. Took a couple days, but we're ready to go here. It's going to be a good one here tonight with Josh Bilicki.
Absolutely. And with that said, let's go ahead and bring on Josh Bilicki. Welcome, Josh. How you feeling, buddy?
Good, guys. How are you doing?
Doing great. So it's going to be a fun podcast here today. We got Josh Bilicki, who drives the number 92 car for DGM, who is also a teammate to our own car here at Drive Smart. So very cool to have that well put together. So we're going to ask you some questions here today. The first one is, we're going to dive into your career. Where are you from, and how did you get your start in racing?
Yeah, so I'm from Wisconsin. My situation is a little bit unique. I'm still here in Wisconsin. Most NASCAR drivers and teams migrate to Charlotte area, and my situation, like I said, is really unique because I live in Wisconsin yet, and our race team, DGM Racing, they're out of Florida. So what also makes this unique is my background is not circle track racing; it's road course racing. So I started racing go-karts on road courses in 2000. I was 4.5 years old, and growing up, I thought I was going to be an IndyCar driver, honestly, all the way up until about 12, 13. That's kind of when it started hitting me. I tried to put together deals to go junior IndyCar racing, and maybe closer to 15, 16 is when it actually hit me hard. Like, all right, this is expensive. This costs a lot of money. And just coming out of go-karts at that point, still racing on road courses. My dad and I actually went racing with the SCCA in Mazda Miata. Very competitive, very fun class, low horsepower. People make fun of those cars, but they teach you a lot about momentum because they don't have any horsepower. So you make one mistake, you're going to suffer through it. So I raced Mazda Miatas in the Spec Miata class for about 4 or 5 years and just picked up sponsorship. We never really had the best budget to go Spec Miata racing. Believe it or not, there's still people that spent a lot of money in Spec Miata, but we won races, just kept making connections, and ultimately I was able to turn that into a couple pro races in IMSA. So I ran IMSA in 2015 and 2016, and in 2017 I wasn't really making a career yet racing. I was making a living doing a lot of driver coaching. And so if you have a Ferrari or whatever kind of car, honestly, a Mazda Miata, a Porsche, a Ferrari, Lamborghini, if you have a car and you want to drive it on the racetrack, but you want to learn how to drive it safely, or you want to pick up, just speed, you'd hire me to coach you. And it was cool. I got to drive a lot of really cool cars, but I wasn't making a living racing like I wanted to. So I was kind of frustrated. Didn't really know where I was going to end up. And NASCAR visited Road America, which is my home track. I live about an hour from Road America. They had been going to Road America numerous times, since 2011, 2012. And so I looked at the entry list one day for the NASCAR race at Road America, and there was one team that had 2 of their cars listed as to be announced, TBA, and this is the week of the race. So this is Wednesday before the race. The race is on a Saturday, so this is only 3 days. I shot my shot and I sent a Facebook message to the race team, and they came back and said, hey, we need a driver. You're local, you have a lot of road course experience. I made my first professional start at Road America, but I'd logged thousands of laps at Road America at that point, from actual go-karts on the big track to Miatas to Porsches, just a lot of different cars that I drove throughout the years. And I felt like I was a good candidate. So they emailed me back, and we were able to kind of put a deal together to get me in the car for that one race. And at the time, I thought all right, I'm going to be a road course ringer. I'll run maybe once or twice a year. That's it. And that same team brought me back to racing oval later in the year, which was really my first time ever on an oval, on a real oval. And that was 2016. I just used a lot of connections I had and met more people inside the NASCAR industry. I met BJ McLeod, Rick Ware, and in 2017, I was able to put together more races in the Xfinity Series, but I also made my first Cup Series start with Rick Ware. So from 2016 to 2017, my career shifted from, all right, I'm going to go road racing to, all right, how do I make a career in NASCAR now? And it's something that I never really thought was possible because I had no circle track experience, honestly. But I figured it out, and I think I just worked really hard. And in 2018, I went full time in the Xfinity Series, running all the races, picked up a pretty good sponsorship deal, and I haven't looked back since. And I just started my 200th NASCAR race at Circuit of the Americas last month. So that's a big milestone for me. I know there were some funny memes going on Twitter about maybe a couple weeks ago talking about, I think Dale Jr. brought it up. He's like, who cares how many starts you have? For me, 200 starts it's a big deal for me, and I think that was pretty cool. So I made a big deal out of that. Just I don't come from a family that has a racing background. I don't come from money, and to have 200 starts in NASCAR's top 3 series, I thought was pretty cool. So this year I'm back with DGM Racing. This is our 3rd year with DGM. Ran a part-time schedule in 22, 23, and now again in 24. So great group of people. I've been teammates of Kyle's before in the Cup Series. We both drove for Rick Ware Racing a little bit, and we've both dabbled and bounced around. But I think that we found a really good home at DGM Racing, and it's a lot of fun every time I get to drive one of the race cars.
That's incredible how a Facebook message led through this entire NASCAR stock car career. Now, you talked about how your initial plan was to go IndyCar racing and stay on the road stuff. Well, do you ever have any plans of potentially maybe doing an IndyCar race if the right opportunity came along, maybe a Indy 500 or anything down that route? Or at this point, at this stage of your career, are you fully committed to NASCAR?
I wouldn't say no. I definitely would need seat time for that. I've been very blessed, and I've driven a lot of different race cars, and I don't have much experience in open wheel cars, and I've been lucky to where I've driven downforce cars, some prototypes and some cars that have downforce, but nothing like an Indy car. So, for me to do the Indy 500, I'm not going to say never. I might have a sponsor one day that says, all right, let's just do it. And I have, I've raced against teammates that have ran the Indy 500, James Davison and Sage Karam, and both are extremely talented, well-versed drivers. They can run. They were competitive in NASCAR. They were competitive in IndyCar, sports car racing. I like to think I'm very versatile. I'm racing a road course. When I'm not in NASCAR, I'm racing on dirt, road courses still. So I like to think I'm versatile, but it would definitely take me a little bit longer to figure out an open wheel car at the Indy 500. But if somebody gave me that opportunity, I would not say no.
Absolutely. That's incredible. It's always good to have them doors open. Now, in past years, you have ran quite a few cup races for various teams. This year, you have taken the step down to the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and you said you felt like you have found a home with DGM. Do you feel like you have found a home with the NASCAR Xfinity Series, or is the goal to jump back to the Cup Series as soon as possible?
Yeah, no, so I really enjoy racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. The cars are fun to drive. It's fun to be competitive and race inside of the top 20 and top 15. On a good day, inside the top 10. We had numerous top 10 runs last year. BGM Racing, they can put together a top 10 car. You just saw Kyle Weatherman finish top 10 at Dover. And we ran inside the top 10 at numerous occasions last year, and that's a lot of fun. When you're in the Cup Series, it's so hard to run top 10. And I believe that I could run top 10 in a top tier Cup car, but when you're in a car that's a 30th place car, it's you can't really drive past that. Maybe you can run 29th or 25th on a road course, but that's about it. So my goal is to get back to the Cup Series, and I do think maybe there'll be a couple Cup starts for me this year, probably on road courses because that's kind of my niche. And there are teams that have reached out to me to run their Cup cars on road courses, but I really like the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and I really, really enjoy working with DGM Racing. And to be honest, if I have a sponsor, I want to steer them towards the NASCAR Xfinity Series with DGM Racing. And it's more fun for me to be competitive and to be in an atmosphere where I feel welcomed, and that's DGM Racing and the NASCAR Xfinity Series. But obviously, every single driver has a goal of racing in the NASCAR Cup Series, and I'm very blessed to have ran almost 100 Cup races. And I want to get back one day, but I don't want to just do it just to do it, just to ride around in 30th. So we'll see what happens. I'm pretty content where I'm at right now. I think the next goal for me is to try to put together another full season. I've been full time in the Cup Series. I've been full time in the Xfinity Series, and since then the sport has changed a little bit, and costs have just risen, and it costs a lot more than it does a couple of years ago. So, right now I'm working on sponsorship deals for this year, but also just trying to plant that seed for 2025.
Absolutely. So I'm going to pass you over to Robert Hill. He is our stat guy. This guy pretty much knows NASCAR Wikipedia right from the top. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Robert Hill.
Awesome.
Yeah, Josh, I want to go back to when it first started for you. You mentioned you don't come from a racing family. What got you into racing in the first place? What made your parents or whoever put you into a go-kart or whatever for the first time actually want to do that?
Yeah, so when I say I don't come from a racing family, I more or less mean that my dad, he didn't race for a living.
Yeah.
My dad grew up a race fan. His father was a race fan. They went to the Indy 500 every single year, and my dad built a vintage race car, a 1965 Mustang. He turned it from a street car into a race car in 1995, and that was the year that I was born. So my dad would race, 3 to 5 times a year here in Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, in the Midwest, and he saw that I loved racing. I mean, I would make race car noises as I ran around the bases when I was in softball when I was 4 years old. So he saw that, I just had an interest in speed and racing, and he bought me a go-kart for Christmas in 2000, and I was 4.5, and it stuck. So, that was my first introduction to racing, and ever since then, anything with a motor, whether it's a dirt bike, a go-kart, a four-wheeler, a sprint car, a lawnmower that goes fast, I just love it. And my dad, he's kind of cut back his racing. He hasn't raced much lately, but hopefully one day I can get my child into it, and it's just a lot of fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. And obviously you mentioned your dad having a bit of a background in racing himself and coming up through the ranks. Is there somebody that's taken you under their wing and kind of been that mentor figure to you? It could be your dad, could be somebody else, could be multiple people.
I would definitely say my dad, on the track and off the track. Um, my dad, he never really, he races a hobby, and he taught me more off the track than I did than I think he taught me on track. And that might sound bad, but he taught me to always don't be afraid to ask. Whether it was asking teams to drive, whether it's asking for sponsorship dollars, whatever it is. My dad taught me a lot more off the track than I think he taught me on track. On track, it was always kind of every man for themselves. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of help through the years, and one person I look at as a sponsor of mine, Trimtex Travel Products. They've backed me, and Joe, who owns Trimtex, has backed me since 2011. So over 10 years now, and he brought me from Spec Miata and SCCA to pro racing in IMSA, and he sponsored me in NASCAR now. He's on all my helmets. So on track, Joe has helped me a lot, but off the track he has too. I'd say those two, Joe and my dad, are probably the most influential people so far.
And it's definitely helpful having those good people in your corner, being there with you every step of the way. And you've mentioned a couple times your background and how you like to race just about anything. And this past weekend, of course, you raced in the WRL at Road America. I had the luxury of being part of the commentary team for that weekend, so that was pretty cool to see you get up there and get a podium finish. It might have been better. There was a little bit of contact and controversy towards the end there, and some wet weather, but obviously a solid podium there. And then you dipped into sprint car racing on Saturday. Feature got rained out, but still able to get over there and dabble in the dirt a little bit. Of course, your NASCAR stuff as well. What's the favorite car that you've raced over the years?
Oh man, that's tough. Right now, what I'm having the most fun in, honestly, is the sprint car that I'm driving. It's so out of the realm of what I know, and how you drive the car is just so unique. I have a lot of fun in the sprint car, but also the Porsche that I'm racing in WRL, and that's with Joe, who owns Trimtex.
Yep.
That car's a lot of fun too. It's competitive and it's just a great car. I definitely say those two right now are my favorites. But man, it's hard to argue against a NASCAR Xfinity Series car though, because they're just raw. The Porsche that I drive doesn't have traction control, but it has ABS and it has all the aids and a lot of electronics. The NASCAR Xfinity Series car is just raw. It's kind of like the sprint car where there's no driver aids, and I really like that. It's hard to drive. It has a 4-speed gearbox, which it'll bite you if you're not smooth with your shifts, and the car itself is it's a monster, kind of like the sprint car. So there's not a race car I don't enjoy driving. Let's just say that.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to be able to dabble in a bit of everything and get your feet wet. It helps as a driver as well, being able to handle different situations and whatnot. But going from one type of race car to another, sometimes even multiple in a weekend, what are the challenges as a driver that you face having to adapt so quickly from one to the other?
Yeah, so I look at this past weekend where I ran a Porsche in WRL and then a sprint car. The cars are they're so different that I don't struggle with those changes. I struggle more when I run Cup and Xfinity on an oval. Just the cars feel so different. I think the last oval I did, the double duty oval I did was Michigan in 2022. So it's been a little bit now. But the cars just drive so different now in the Cup Series. I struggle going from the Xfinity car to the Cup car, back to the Xfinity car, back to the Cup car, just because the Xfinity car is still that old school, big tire, gearbox, the 4-speed gearbox. You drive it a little bit looser. The Cup car is just so tight, and it's just a different car now. So I don't want to say I struggle, but that's the biggest struggle for me is to go from that Cup car to the Xfinity car. When I go from like last year, I ran the Xfinity race at Road America. We qualified on Friday night, and then as soon as qualifying was over, I literally ran to my truck and I drove the sprint car. Even to go from the NASCAR Xfinity car to the sprint car at Plymouth wasn't that challenging because the cars are so different. It's just the closer they are, it'd be like going from an Indy car to an Indy Lights car. There's differences, but they're very minute, and it's hard as a driver to go at Road America and adjust your braking zone by just 50 feet and have a little bit less grip through the carousel and the kink. That's harder for me than it is to go to, Plymouth when I've been racing at Road America all day.
Definitely makes sense, and the differences would be a little tricky to adapt to. You have different braking points, different throttle points, and all that you have to adapt to throughout the weekend. But I'll toss you back over here to Dustin real quick, see what Dustin has for you, and then I'll have a few more for you later.
Sure.
Awesome.
So you have some very loyal sponsors, Insurance King being one of them, that has stuck with you for what feels like your entire career. Can you talk about the importance of what a loyal sponsor has done for you in your career?
Yeah, so I have a lot of loyal sponsors. A lot of my sponsors have stuck with me throughout, my entire career. Trimtex being one of them that has taken me from amateur road racing to pro racing in IMSA to NASCAR, and they're still with me every single year. And Insurance King has been with me since 2019. They've been a primary on my car every single year. This sport needs sponsors, and you need sponsors to go racing. I don't have the luxury of having family money, so I try to make sure all my sponsors are happy on and off the track. I'd say off the track, honestly, is probably more important than on track. Obviously, everyone wants to win, but we have realistic expectations of what a win is for us. Wins for us sometimes at DJM Racing are top 10s, top 15s, top 20s, depending the track. And my sponsors understand that. And I think I keep the relationships off the track, so close that that's one of the reasons why they are loyal and they come back. Obviously, if I'm doing something wrong for 5 years in a row, I don't think Insurance King would be back. So, many of my sponsors have been with me since my my amateur days and since my first days in NASCAR. And there's only been a handful that I've lost or that haven't come back.
That's amazing that like you said, like sponsorship in NASCAR is everything, and sponsorship in motorsport is so important, but NASCAR is super, super important because that's a make or break on a career. But talk about your career. Where do you see yourself in 10 years, and what kind of legacy would you like to leave in motorsports in general, whether that's NASCAR or road racing or dirt racing or whatever that may be?
So in 10 years from now, I think about the 5-year plan, but to answer your question, in 10 years from now, I'll be just turning 39. Ideally, when I'm that age, in a perfect world, I'm competing for race wins in the NASCAR Cup Series or the NASCAR Xfinity Series. That's my goal. I love where I'm at right now, and if I can elevate one of the teams that I'm with right now, DGM Racing, to race for wins and championships, that'd be incredible. But I want to get that opportunity to race for wins and race for a championship, and I don't want to be one of those that am forced to retire or have to retire from racing when I'm 30, early 30s. I want to race up until I can't race anymore. Ideally, it'd be cool to race in NASCAR until early 40s, maybe mid 40s. If I can do it till I'm 50, great. But I also want to enjoy it too, and I know it burns people out. You get to the point where you've done it for 20 years, and you just get burnt out, and I don't want to get to that point where I don't want to race at all. I want to be able to enjoy racing, whether it's sports car racing or dirt racing, which I've found a new love for in the last year. I want to make sure that I last up until I'm mid 50s or 60s. But in 10 years from now, I hope that I'm racing for wins, whether it's Xfinity Series, even the Truck Series. I want to race for wins in a NASCAR series.
Sure, I definitely believed you're going to get there, but I want to go back to Talladega a few weeks ago. It got pretty bumpy for the entire DGM team, but you were in contention to win that thing. Can you walk us through everything that happened there at the end of Talladega?
Yeah, so Talladega was really boring for us until it wasn't. We raced at Daytona earlier in the year, and I was minding my own business at Daytona, and I think middle of stage 2, I got ran over, and it killed our race. And so we went into Talladega thinking same mindset, but we are actually going to hang back. We want to be there at the end of stage 3. So that's exactly what I did. I don't think I was inside the top 30 at all for the first 2 stages. I mean, that was by design. We had a car that could have raced up front, but we wanted to make sure that we had a car there at the end that could potentially win. And stage 3 started. I did try to move up a couple spots. I think we were running mid 30s or mid 20s, and with like 10 laps to go, my car got really, really loose. And I actually had a left rear tire go flat, and we had to pit, I think, like 7 or 8 laps ago. And I fell down a whole lap. I was like in 32nd or 33rd. And I'm like, man, this is, unless we get a caution, my race is over. And we got a caution with 2 laps to go. We got the lucky dog, had an incredible restart. We got lucky with a couple people running out of fuel, and I found myself inside the top 10. There was another caution, so we restarted, I think, 7th or 8th with 2 laps to go. And I knew the cars ahead of me were low on fuel. So I chose the outside, thinking if they run out, they're probably going to try to get down, and I'm going to drive right around them, and we're going to be in a good spot. They didn't run out of fuel, but I looked in my mirrors as I'm coming to the white flag, and there was a third lane that had formed behind me with some really good cars. And when they got close to me, I jumped up there, and they pushed me. We went from like probably 10th at the time to what I felt was like a lead. Like it was probably 4th or 5th, but I mean, we were leading the outside lane, coming to the white flag, had a huge run. And in my mind, I'm like, this is the closest I've ever been to potentially being there at the end to win a race. And as soon as we crossed the white flag, took the white flag, all my help behind me dropped down. And I was the only one in that third lane. Couldn't merge because they had all dropped down. And I went from, I think, 7th or 6th all the way back to 16th. And that's where we finished. By the time I got my momentum back, the race had finished just about. So, yeah, roller coaster of emotions. I know I saw Kyle was obviously involved in a couple of wrecks. I mean, it's just a hit or miss. I've been there to where we've raced really hard and we've been inside the top 10 and top 15. Last year at Talladega, the same race, Insurance King was on my car. We restarted 10th with like 3 laps to go, and we were collected in the big one, and we didn't finish the race. So some of it's luck, some of it's who you got helping you, and as a small team, we don't always get the help like the other Chevy teams. So sometimes you got to fend for yourself, and I took a risk by jumping up in the third lane, hoping that they would stick with me, and they pushed me for about a half a lap, and then they all kind of abandoned me, and it's every man for themselves at that point. But yeah, pretty cool to be in tension there for a little bit.
Talladega is always such a scary track to watch as a fan. I can only imagine as a driver. But my next question is, since you said that you were more into IndyCar growing up, I'm curious if you had a favorite NASCAR driver. If not, who was your favorite IndyCar driver?
I did. So my drivers growing up were Jeff Gordon. I loved his race car. It was colorful, and he was winning races. And also Michael Schumacher. You know, he had a bright red car. And he was winning every Formula One race that I watched when I was young. So those two were my favorite drivers. I wanted to be a Formula One driver up until I was 10, and then I realized, all right, this is out of reach. Maybe I was a little bit older than that, but as soon as I realized I can't, I need to be in Europe right now. That's when my mindset shifted. All right, how can I go IndyCar racing? And then when I think I was a sophomore, maybe a sophomore or a senior in high school, I emailed an Indy Lights team, a Wisconsin team here, and I set up a meeting. My dad and I drove to that meeting. We got in that meeting, and they basically said, "This is how much money you need to bring." It was it was like the same amount as what our house costs. And I'm like, all right, this is my first big wake up call. And then that's when we went sports car racing and Spec Miata. So, yeah, a little bit sidetracked, but yeah, those are my two favorite drivers growing up.
We always get, it doesn't matter what driver it is that we have going here, they always say their favorite driver is Jeff Gordon. Now, my favorite driver growing up was Jeff Gordon as well. I believe, Robert, your favorite driver is Jeff Gordon too, right?
He was indeed, yes.
It's
a good choice.
It's always Jeff Gordon. Well, I'm going to pass it back to Robert Hill, and I'm sure he's going to have some good questions.
Obviously, Josh, you mentioned how you had that wake-up call there with the cost of the Indy Lights program and how much that would have cost with having to mortgage the house or whatever you might need to do there. But have you had any other moments in your career where it kind of made you take a step back and have to rethink your path and what you wanted to do or needed to do to get to the next step?
Yeah, I have, and even more recently, honestly. Going back to some of my sponsors, I had a sponsorship deal that kind of fell apart this last year, where I'd been in Cup for 2 years, driving full time in Cup in 21, and then most of the races in 22, and then kind of taking a step back last year. I don't view going to the Xfinity Series as a step back, but at the time I was looking at it as a step back, and I'm happy where I'm at right now, but just last year, at the end of last year, I was really frustrated and we weren't running super good in Cup. And I kind of had to take a step back and say, all right, what can I do to put myself back on the map? But what can I do to start enjoying this sport more too? And I really took a step back and looked at the Xfinity Series. And I had more fun driving in the Xfinity Series last year for DGM Racing than anything else, honestly. And that's a recent time where I had to take a step back and just kind of reevaluate. But yeah, going back to the Indy Lights team, I legitimately had thought, I think this is probably 2010, 2011, I had thought that they were going to, interview me to drive for them for free. I didn't know how the sport worked. And we went there and they said, this is what it costs. And I knew what the value of my parents' house was. And I'm like, this costs more than the house costs. And our house isn't even paid off yet. Like, how are we going to make this work? And that was like, I remember I was crushed. And my dad and I are thinking, all right, so what is the next step? We had a Miata at the time, but it wasn't super competitive. So we ended up buying a different spec Miata, just a newer version. And we raced in Miatas for a handful of years. And I always felt like, man, I want to be in pro racing. I want to, I looked up to guys like that were in Indy Lights and in IndyCar that were almost my age. And I was just so frustrated. But, it is what it is. And good things don't come easy.
No, that's absolutely right. It takes effort and takes a lot of hard work and sometimes devastation to make it where you want to go. And now you made it here to the pro ranks of NASCAR. Still, obviously, a lot to go, and you still want to work your way back up to the top level of the sport and into the top step of the podium there as well, which is definitely within reach. Obviously, you need the support. So if anyone wants to sponsor Josh, reach out and make it happen over there. Sell your house, give him some money. But you mentioned how sometimes your races go a little bit different than the other Chevy teams. You don't necessarily get the same support on the track. And what are some things maybe that people don't understand that makes it tougher being with one of the smaller teams? You don't necessarily get the same factory support from Chevy. You don't get access maybe as much to simulators and things like that. What are some of those differences and maybe some of the ways that the smaller teams work to get around that lack of support?
Yeah, so I look at a team like DGM Racing compared to, let's just say, Joe Gibbs. They won.
Yeah.
They won last weekend at Dover, and DGM Racing probably has maybe 10 to 12 full-time employees, and Joe Gibbs is a powerhouse team with 4 full-time Xfinity cars and 4 full-time Cup cars that probably have 500 total employees. They have access to a simulator 24/7 through the TRD sim, and I don't even have access to simulator. I know my teammate Kyle, he works with Hendrick and he has some access to the Chevy simulator, but I don't have that. So for me, I got my rig back there, my iRacing, which I use, which is, it helps, absolutely helps, but it's not the same thing. Um, you know, that's just one small detail. We have 12 employees. We don't even have an engineer, a real engineer. Joe Gibbs has 150 engineers. They have a marketing team. Their marketing team alone is bigger than our entire race team. And they're working on sponsorship dollars. Whereas I'm a driver, but I'm also working behind the scenes to bring in sponsorship dollars. I mean, our team owner is working to bring in sponsorship dollars. Like, we're all hands on in almost every single part. I don't build the cars, but I am hands on in almost every other avenue, whether it's graphic design, designing my hero car, designing my car for next week, and whatever it is. Whereas Joe Gibbs, those drivers, their job is to drive. That's it. They focus on how they go faster, and that's it. And there's just a lot of small differences, but I mean, layer after layer after layer, it adds up. And that's how these teams have 500 plus employees, and we only have 10 to 15 employees.
It's definitely a big difference there. And like you said, just a small fraction of what some teams have in a single department is the entire team at DGM. So definitely makes it tougher. But you also mentioned the fact that you wear multiple hats. Why don't you walk us through what a week is what does a week look like in the life of Josh Bilicki preparing to go to a next race or looking ahead to the next time you can get yourself into a race car?
Yeah, most of it honestly is sometimes I think about myself as a businessman more than a race car driver. And growing up, I didn't think that it would be like that, but it is what it is. I got to do what I got to do, and my week to week mostly is either working on sponsorship, bringing in new sponsors, which is not easy. I mean, for every 100 people you reach out to, you might get one response, and they'll probably say no. But all it takes is that one person to say yes. But everything from sponsor management to I do a lot of my own graphic design, which it takes time to do that. Some of these teams, their graphic team is just as big as our team. So today I was working on hero cards and making sure that we're taken care of for our Darlington press release, which is going to be coming out either tomorrow or early next week. And then obviously I try to play a race car driver role too, to where I'm on my simulator and I'm watching video for Darlington, watching the broadcast, watching onboard video, but it's a constant juggle. And it's always, there's just not enough time in the day to do everything that I want to do. There's thousands of sponsorship proposals in my head probably that I want to get out, but I'm only a one-man band, and unfortunately I don't have much help. So yeah, my week is, I'd say probably 50% managing my sponsorship deals and trying to bring in new sponsors, 25% race car driver, 25% miscellaneous, graphic designer, making sure my sponsors for next week submit their pit passes, and just all the small little details that people don't think about. A guest guide. I'm very lucky that I have DJM Racing to help me with these small things. But last year I made my own guest guides and just small things like that. An hour here, an hour there. Before you know it, you got a 14-hour day.
That's pretty wild, because the tasks that you just named off is like the jobs of 4, 5, 6 different people on some teams, and you're doing it all yourself, which is quite amazing and quite stressful, actually, preparing for a week like that. But you mentioned your Darlington press release is coming up soon. I'm not going to ask you what the car is, because we're going to wait for the press release. How much input did you get into deciding what throwback you're going to go with?
Actually, this sponsor sponsored a car about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I had pitched this sponsor. It's a new sponsor for me. It's not a new sponsor for NASCAR. I pitched a sponsor a different throwback, which I designed and I rendered up. Every sponsorship pitch has its own rendering. So if you tell me, hey, Celsius, they want to sponsor you, Josh, put together a rendering of the car. I'll put together a rendering of the car. So that takes time too. But I had sent the sponsor a pitch with actually a Jeff Gordon throwback, and they came back and said, actually, we have an idea. So I unfortunately didn't have any input in this one. I'm okay with it. The car looks phenomenal. I'm super excited to share with you. It's a very true, like very, very true throwback. The number's different, but we even have some major, major associate sponsors on the car that was actually on the car back in 10 years ago.
That's awesome.
Too. So it's super cool. Actually, a sponsor that I never would have thought would be sponsoring me. So yeah, we're hoping to either have it released tomorrow on Friday or early next week. It came together last minute. We got approval last minute, so I mean, I pull in some help for some graphic design. I ran out of time, and I pulled in my buddy Tim Dolbin. He'll be whipping up a graphic probably as we speak right now. So if it's ready in time, we're gonna try to release it tomorrow.
That's awesome, and definitely looking forward to seeing what you guys have cooked up. But on the topic of throwbacks, obviously this one, I think this one might be one of your favorites. Sounds like you're pretty excited about it. But other than this particular car, the ones you've run in the past, what's been your favorite throwback that you've had the opportunity to run? And was it something that you suggested?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to have run a lot of really cool paint schemes. Throwback paint schemes. My first Southern 500 Cup race was in 2020 during COVID, and it was a Tommy Baldwin throwback to Tommy Baldwin's father. I was driving the 7 car for Tommy Baldwin at the time, and it was a very clean yellow car with his father's number font. Super cool car. That car was an Insurance King car. So Insurance King has always been really good about adjusting their logo and the colors. And I love that. Obviously, if you have a very modern logo on an old car, sometimes it just doesn't work. But Insurance King let me mock up numerous different cars. So that was 2020. That was a really cool one. All the throwbacks I've had at Darlington have been really cool. So that was 2020. 2021, I was full-time at Cup. We ran a Rusty Wallace throwback, which was my idea. I designed it. I kind of changed my sponsors' logos around to make it look like the Rusty Wallace font, which was pretty cool. 22, I ran an Insurance King Bill Elliott Burger King car in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, which I was a big Bill Elliott fan growing up. I didn't even know that he had a Burger King car. So my sponsor came to me with that idea. We had a full race suit designed for the race and everything, and all of my throwbacks have been pretty cool. And then one year at Talladega, we ran a car that looked like shoot, what was it? It was an old Trans Am. It was a Trans Am paint scheme from the movie. I'm blanking out right now. And we got so much hate from true Trans Am like enthusiasts because we put it on a Ford Mustang. But it was a Smokey and the Bandit inspired paint scheme with
Sweet.
the Trans Am with the Trans Am. I think actually the Firebird on the hood, and we got so much hate from that. But I thought that was cool too. I've been very fortunate to run a lot of cool paint schemes in my NASCAR career so far.
Yeah, it sounds really awesome. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing this one whenever it comes out, hopefully tomorrow or early next week, like you said. And I just want to touch on one more thing. You mentioned how you do a lot of graphic design yourself. You also do the marketing, some PR stuff. Who taught you all this stuff? Is it all self-taught because you needed to learn it, or did you have some good people to lean on throughout the process?
So I'm going to tell you a story that goes back to high school. When I was a freshman in high school, I was a little punk, and I took Graphics 1 freshman year in high school.
Okay.
And I hated it. I failed Graphics 1 in high school because I did not like it. I thought to myself, I'm never going to use this. Why am I taking this? And I needed a credit, so I took it. I failed it freshman 1. I retook it senior year because I needed one more credit. And I actually paid attention. That was kind of around when I started like growing up and maturing. And I thought to myself, actually, I'm having a lot of fun using Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop. So that was senior year. And after I graduated high school, I found myself using Adobe a lot more, rendering race cars, and everything that I needed to learn was on YouTube. So, Graphics 1 class in high school taught me an introduction, and it got me interested. But after that, everything I learned was on YouTube. And honestly, any questions I have, I ask Google or ask YouTube, and I can find an answer. And I probably learned a little bit more in on YouTube than I did in the graphic class, but that's just kind of how I've always been. I've always been kind of self-taught through YouTube or Google.
Those are both great tools. I use them all the time to learn different things, and it's definitely a great tool to lean on. Dustin, what do you got, my friend?
So me and Robert are pretty big here on sim racing and mainly
We're not
iRacing.
good at it, but we like it.
Oh, we like to
Better
say
than
that
my
we're good.
rig.
So okay, so our next question is about iRacing, and obviously it's one of the more realistic simulators. You being a full-on race car driver and being big on iRacing, can you tell us how realistic iRacing is?
Yeah, so I think iRacing is the closest thing, other than a multi-million-dollar simulator, like a manufacturer simulator, to the real thing. Like the closest thing to the real thing, other than, like I said, those Chevy, Ford, Toyota simulators. I think it's a really, really good tool. And for me, if I'm going to go drive at Road America, let's just say in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, I'm going to run iRacing for as many hours as I can. If I could run 10 hours before that weekend, that's a tool. What I'll do is I'll go on YouTube, or I'll go on the NASCAR members website, and I'll pull up onboard video from last year's race at Road America, and I'll compare notes. All right, what's the difference from iRacing to last year's video? And like I said, I'll use it as a tool. So I know that maybe my braking zone's going to change in real life, but it's still like a track like Circuit of the Americas, where it's 20 corners. You can find a rhythm, and you can familiarize yourself with the track that you're only at once a year. I love it, man. Like iRacing, some people say it's not the real thing. If you're good on iRacing, I think that you could probably be good in real life. It is different. There's a lot of sensation that you don't get in real life on iRacing, or vice versa. But it's a tool, man. And I feel like a good race car driver, just like they can adapt to any race car in real life, can adapt in any race car on the simulator. And I love it, man. It's a great platform, honestly. And I've made friends off of it. I don't get on it as much as I want to anymore. Like I used to drive a lot of random cars, Indy cars, like cars that I can't drive in real life. I'll jump on the simulator. I don't unfortunately get to do that much anymore, but anytime that I have some free time, I'll go run up a dirt truck at Crandon, or an Indy car, or a Formula One car, at tracks in Europe that I know I just can't go do in real life. And it's a lot of fun, but it's a tool, and it's a very useful tool.
Yeah, I always felt like any driver coming up, that's the best tool, because getting, lap times down and also just getting track time, without being on a budget or taking chances of tearing up a car is such a good opportunity and such a good tool. But my next question is, you've been racing for some time, whether if that's go-kart or going into oval racing or road racing or dirt racing. What is the biggest lesson you have learned in your racing career?
Man, there's a lot. I'd say obviously working hard, but that's a given. Don't burn bridges. Whether it's teams that you've driven for in the past, or sponsors. I mean, even this last year, I've driven for teams that I didn't think I'd be driving for them anymore. Or it's not DGM, but working with people that maybe 5 years ago I thought I'm never going to see this person again. Don't burn bridges, but also I think just working hard, man. Like just like anything in life, the harder you work, I think the luckier you get, honestly. And good things don't come easy. You got to work hard, but also don't be afraid to ask questions. Even if you think that they're dumb, don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to reach out. I mean, and shoot your shot. I look at my first NASCAR start, and that was simply off a Facebook message. I sold Insurance King off a Facebook message, honestly. So don't be afraid to shoot your shot sometimes, whether it's a team owner. I mean, before my time in NASCAR, I would send proposals and my resumes to so many different team owners, and one of them being Peter Cunningham, who's a road race team on Real Time Racing here in Wisconsin, and I would send him multiple resumes every single year. I mean, this is before my time in pro racing. I didn't know how the sport worked. I thought maybe he would just hire me or let me drive his car. I didn't know how it worked, but several years ago, him and I were talking. He's like, I got all those resumes. And he's like, I wish I would have been able to help you, but I couldn't. I didn't have a budget for myself to go racing. How can I help you? How can I put you in a car? But just those small details. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to shoot your shot, and don't be annoying. Don't send a text or don't call somebody 300 times a year. But a couple times a year, stay relevant.
Absolutely. I love that. That's one thing I love the most about these podcasts is taking in information from people who's been in the industry for so long. But my next question is, obviously, you got very deep into the business side of motorsports. At what point did that become necessary? Because I'm sure at one point it was go to the track with your family as a kid and it's all fun, all fun. At what point did it go from, all right, I really need to buckle down, and this is a business that I need to be working on 24/7, and I have to see this entire different side of motorsport that I didn't even know about?
I'd say about 2012 when my dad started making me pay for half of the expenses. I worked a part-time job after high school. I would drive right to work. I'd work for 8 hours after I just went to high school for 7 hours, and I had to pay for half my expenses, tires, the entry fee. My dad helped me out a lot, and I wouldn't be here without my dad. But at the end of the day, racing is expensive, and my dad couldn't foot the bill himself either. It just is expensive. So I worked hard, and I quickly realized, man, if I want to take this to the next step, I gotta buckle down and find partners, sponsors, and my dad helped me with that. My dad's the one that told me don't be afraid to ask. And don't be annoying about it, but don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to send proposals, send letters in the mail. And it was about 2014, 2015, is when I really buckled down and said, all right, I really need to get serious and just learn more about the business side of the sport, because without sponsors, I'm not going to be able to race.
That's crazy. I mean, it's so important in motorsports. That's something that you don't really know for any kid, watching now. Is something big to pick up on is how important running business is compared to, hey, I'm just going to show up and drive the wheels off of the thing. You have to have both. So my next question is, obviously you're still living in Wisconsin. Why there versus making the move over to North Carolina like many other drivers have?
Yeah, so it started as most of my sponsors are here in the Midwest. I'd say majority of them are. I have a couple great partners from Texas area, but most of my sponsors are either local to that race. California, they're going to sponsor me in Sonoma. Texas, they're going to sponsor me in Texas. But most of my core partners are here in Wisconsin. And at the end of the day, I do like being able to get away from the industry. Racing's always on the forefront of my mind. The business side of it's always on the forefront of my mind. But I do like to get away from the industry and work by myself. And coming home to Wisconsin, I have all my friends here. I have my family here. I live 2 miles away from my family. It's nice to be able to get away, but still work hard on being in the industry. But for a while I did consider moving, and I haven't had the need yet. Driving for DGM Racing right now wouldn't even make sense for me to move to Charlotte because they're in Florida. They have a small shop in Charlotte, but if I was in Charlotte, I'd still be away from the race team, and it wouldn't change anything about my situation right now, other than I'd be way farther away from my friends and my family. So, if Joe Gibbs called me and said, Josh, we got a full-time gig for you next year, but you got to be here in Charlotte, I'd be in Charlotte, but I haven't had to do that yet. My full-time seasons in Xfinity and Cup, they didn't require me to be in Charlotte, and as long as I got an office here in Wisconsin to keep working, this is where I'm going to be.
One final question before I send you back over to Robert for the final time is, do you got any tracks that stand out to you where you're like, hey, this is my track, this is my best track, I've always been super good here? I feel like I got some on iRacing where I'm like, hey, this is mine. So I'm wondering if you got any in real life of where that is this your track that you feel like is hands down your best every time you go there.
Road America for sure. A good example is I just drove almost 9 or 10 hours the last weekend. From Thursday's test day to qualifying on Friday to Saturday and Sunday. I just have so many laps of Road America. I feel like I could drive it with my eyes closed, and I really do feel like that. Circle tracks, there's a couple tracks that stand out. I've always been good at Martinsville and Bristol short tracks, two different short tracks. I mean, Bristol high banked, fast, and also Pocono. Pocono being a pretty unique track. I've ran really well there in Cup. I've ran really well there, what I feel, in Xfinity, and I enjoy going there. So I'd say those two tracks are probably my best road course and one of my better ovals.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to send you back over to Robert Hill for the final time before we wrap this thing up.
Yeah, Josh, I have two final questions here for you. One, of course, all of your teammates you've had throughout your career, I'm sure you've learned something from each of them, and they've all been great. But is there one teammate that you've had that really stands out as somebody that you've really been able to lean on and you've learned a lot from throughout your career? And that could be NASCAR or otherwise.
That's really tough because I've had so many teammates. Going back to who I've enjoyed driving with, James Davison, he was always fun to be around, honestly. I may have not learned the most from him because he didn't drive very often, and he probably learned more being my teammate because he had very limited NASCAR sets. Even Kyle, Kyle and I have driven together as teammates numerous times. He always gets the absolute most out of the car in qualifying, and he just puts himself in a better position to start the race. And you saw it this last weekend, starting inside the top 10. I can learn from that. Not coming from a circle track background, one thing I struggle at is the single lap qualifying. I feel like maybe my race pace can match his, but he just does a better job extracting everything out of the car in that one lap. Whereas former racing, road course racing, I grew up, you got a half an hour to set your fast lap. So if you make a mistake in lap 1, all right, well, here's lap 2, here's lap 3, here's lap 4, and so on. I mean, WRL, which we raced this last weekend, had 4 40-minute qualifying sessions.
Yeah.
It's your fastest lap of the day. So you got a lot of opportunity to go out there and run a fast time, whereas NASCAR is just different. So I do feel like I can learn some from Kyle, too, and just looking at his data, and seeing how he extracts everything out of the car. I'd say he's probably one of the most.
It's always good to have the fun teammate and James Davison, and then of course Kyle fun too, but somebody you're able to lean on for that data. And I'll end with a fun question here. Looking way down the road, whenever you decide to retire, maybe 60, 70 years old, however old you might be, maybe not that old, but what is one race that's on your bucket list that you absolutely feel that you need to cross off before you retire?
Coming from a road course background, most people would say 24 Hours Le Mans, and that's a bucket list. But if I had to choose just one, it'd be the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, which is an insane track. I mean, I got really close to putting together a deal to race at Nürburgring, the full track in the VLN series a couple years ago, and that track is insane. Le Mans is cool because it's Le Mans, right? But man, if I'm on my deathbed, I'm gonna think to myself, I ran the 24 Hours of Nürburgring. I'd say that would be one. Now it'd be cool to run all three: 24 Hours Daytona, Le Mans, and Nürburgring. But if I had to just choose one, that's gonna make me a better driver too. It'd be Nürburgring.
That would definitely be a absolutely amazing opportunity. And Josh, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I'm going to throw it back to Dustin to close us out, but it's been great having you here with us.
Before we let you go, Josh, go ahead and tell the people where they can find you: Instagram, Twitter, shout out your sponsors, everything you want to do here.
Yeah, so my social media follows are pretty easy to find. It's at Josh Bilicki on X or Twitter. And then on Instagram, it's at Josh Bilicki. My Facebook is at Josh Bilicki Racing. So if you just Google Josh Bilicki, you can probably find everything from my website to my Twitter to my Facebook, Instagram. Man, I appreciate you guys having me. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it, guys. I know I'm going to see you guys some more this year. Robert, maybe I'll see you at a WRL race.
Absolutely. We'll have to meet up next one I go to.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
There you have it, Josh Bilicki. What an interview. What an episode. I feel like this is one of our best episodes yet. I mean, the interview was fantastic.
Yeah, it was really great to be able to dig into the career of Josh and who he is as a person. Obviously, I've gotten the opportunity to see him race in the sports car world as well as NASCAR, and hopefully get to see him on a couple of those dirt races as well. Of course, that's my background as a dirt track announcer as well. So it would be really cool to see that. And Dustin, it's always great working with you, my friend.
Always fun working with you, Robert. Good having the podcast back on track here.
Absolutely.
We'll be back next week with another guest.
This one's going to be fun as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll be back for episode number 10, but this is a wrap for episode number 9. I appreciate all you guys for tuning in here tonight, and we'll catch you all in the next episode.